Just a little about, I'm going to be giving you some information, and I think you probably want to know a little about the source. I'm a young guy, been on the water for about 70 years, believe it or not, and my father took me on my first boat when I was about 9 or 10. Was mostly, for most of my life, I was like you, I was a recreational boater, and I was self-trained. How many of you you trained yourself? How many? Yeah. Anybody took ASA course, U.S. sailing? Okay, good for you. Good for you. Yeah, okay. So, I got into this because I remember when I went into this job, I had a real job for many years, and I basically retired, and my wife encouraged me to go into selling boats because that's what I loved. And I went into an office, at that time we lived in California, I went into an office that was filled with really, really good sailors. As an example, one of them trimmed main sheet on Stars and Stripes when they won the America's Cup, that level, okay? And so I go into the thinking I'm a big-time sailor, I've been sailing for 40 years, and I run into people who kind of laughed at what I didn't know about sailing. So it made me aware of the fact that even when you do the ASA courses, they teach you how to position the sails, okay? And we'll start there because you need to start there, but I mean, that's what they talked about. They mostly teach you about rules of the road and those kinds of things. It's very useful, but it doesn't give you the fine points of sailing, all right? I think most of you club race, right? You PHRF racing, as I understand it? Yeah, okay. And so you have you probably all want to go faster than you've been going. And part of what you get out of understanding sail trim better is a better understanding of how to make the boat go faster in heavy air and to go at all in light air. As you all know, you sail around here. This is a hard place to be a sailor. The wind is constantly shifting, it's too light, it's too heavy, it's wrapping around an island, you're fighting a current. When I was in Southern California, you could tell the wind speed by the time of day. I mean, if it's 12 knots, you know it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If it went to 17 knots, everybody ran for cover. And if it didn't go above 5, nobody went out. So, but here it's different, right? So I think I'm hoping that you all will learn something today. And usually I start with a simple question. How many of you know what a roundup is? Aha, I think I know the answer to the next question. How many of you enjoy the experience? All right, so when you're finished with this, you will never round up again. I will tell you why it happened, okay? Anyway, so I'm going to go through this. Again, we start at the, so for me to get out of your way, let me tuck in here. Right. Yeah, are we good? Mm-hmm. So we're going to start at the simple side of things. What I'm going to be covering, let me get this right here. Yeah. So, as I said, many sailors are self-trained, limited knowledge of the fine points of trailing. We all know how to make the boat go. By the way, talking about racing, if I'm on the water and a boat pulls up alongside of me, it's a race, all right? So I know there's many people who are cruisers. I can usually tell they've got a drink in one hand and they're driving the boat. But for me, part of my enjoyment of sailing is the techniques that are involved, or enjoying how to make the boat, optimize the boat's performance. That's just one of the things I get out of sailing. One of the things that makes that so difficult is that things change so quickly. There's so many factors involved in making a boat go through the road.
Hi.
Okay. Anyway, knowing how to some of the things I'm going to teach you will make you safer. Particularly this idea of roundup. It has to do with the balance of the boat, and that has to do with sail trim, by the way. It's going to shorten your transit times. You're going cruising, and hopefully it adds to your enjoyment. All right. So the basics. We're going to talk about shaping. The basic parts of this is how to position the sails, but then we're going to move pretty quickly to how to shape the sails. That's really most of what this is about. We'll talk about draft and twist. Everybody, how many people know what twist is? Oh, good, okay. I may be wasting my time here, but we'll see what happens. And also we'll talk about balancing the boat, which is all about the roundup thing, and then of course we'll talk a little bit about reefing and its impact on trim. I'm going to make this simple. I usually go through this pretty quickly. I always think of this as two modes. One mode where the sail is acting like a wing, and one mode where it's acting like a kite. Pretty straightforward, right? I think you're all aware of that. In the wing mode, it is literally acting like an airplane wing. It is creating a difference in pressure between one side of the sail and the other. And you would think, now by the way, the amount of difference is probably 1/10 of a pound per square inch. So some of you, I'm sure, have a boat in the 35, 40-foot range. It probably has 700 square foot of sail area. How much power do you think your sail is creating with 1/10 of a pound per inch? 8,000 pounds. Isn't that startling?
Yeah.
And that has to do with the shape of the wing. So an airplane, that's why an airplane goes up. It weighs many, many tons. It goes up in the air because there's a pressure difference, but there's so many square inches that small difference makes a lot of power. By the way, we'll talk about this, but notice the shape of an airplane wing. It is not a curve. It's kind of an ellipse. You notice that it's fatter on the front part, tails off, right? That shape should be in your head because that's what you're trying to create with your sail. Downwind, pretty straightforward. You got a kite. Put the wind behind you. You've seen America Cup boats going faster than the wind speed downwind. There's a reason for that. It has to do with boat speed. And some of what we'll talk about will make that a little more easy to understand. Upwind, I won't spend a lot of time on this. In this way, we said it creates a pressure on the back, a higher pressure on one side of the sail than the other. And the forward portion of your mainsail or any sail should be roughly positioned into the wind. You want the wind to be pretty much equal on either side of the sail. And I think I know a lot. By the way, I'm an ASA instructor. I used to be partners in a sailing school, and I did a lot of teaching. Sometimes this idea of I'm seeing a telltale stall, I'm not sure which way to turn the boat, and that's what this is about. After a while, if you've been sailing along, it becomes kind of natural. But if you're beginning, it's sometimes tough to figure out which way. But basically, you're trying to show the stalling telltale. You're trying to show it more wind. So if, for instance, the back telltale is stalled, you want to point up into the wind. If the inside telltale is stalled, you want to fall off, right? Kind of general. By the way, there are 3 telltales on the Genoa. Why? I only need one. No?
The wind's
No.
different the wind's different at higher
Yes, yeah. We'll go through this a little more, right? But I've had a lot of people ask me, why do you have 3 of them? By the way, I know they need some training. By the way, there's none on, so they're on the, they're basically on front of the Genoa. Why aren't they on the main? They're usually on some boats, they'll be on the backside, be on the leach of the main. Mainly is because there's so much turbulence from the headsail that those telltales are going to flop all over. They won't mean anything anyway, and that's why you put them on the leach. Right? Downwind, position the sails roughly 90 degrees. There's a lot of people who believe if you make the sail a little fuller, you get a little more power. When you're you get into one design racing, where it's really about crew against crew, because the boats are even. These slight differences, everybody's got their idea of what makes the boat fast. The person I mentioned who trimmed main sheet on Stars and Stripes believed that horizontal wrinkles on the main were fast. He couldn't tell me why, but he's been sailing forever. His name is Billy Peterson. He's still in Marina del Rey. He's sailing 242 Martins, one designs. I think everyone here, if you've been sailing anytime, you know the idea of apparent wind. But the point I want to make is that The apparent wind is because the wind is different at different levels. We'll talk about, let's see, get into this one here. Yeah, the wind, as we talked, the wind aloft is different. Why? Any idea?
Less drag from the water.
Exactly, yeah. And therefore, the rougher the weather, the more likely the shear is going to be higher, right? The higher the wind speed, sometimes that's also a factor too. Right? Let's see. Okay. So, of course, the sails are reacting to apparent wind. As the true wind speed increases, then you're going to have, or boat speed decreases, the apparent wind moves aft. And conversely, when you do the other way. So this used to drive me crazy before I learned some more about sailing. When I was sailing early in my career, it would be kind of a dead day. I see the wind start to come up. I start to sail, the boat moves further, and the boat stops because the wind moved. Right? If the boat moved, I basically stall myself, right? So now I wait until I got a good chunk of wind before I try and make the boat go. Let's see, we talked about this. Shaping the sail. Now we're talking about the things that hopefully maybe there's some new stuff for me to present to you. We talked about this and let me see, I went backwards here. Yeah, so this is the idea. At the top of the sail, the wind is at a different angle than the bottom of the sail. By the way, if you're going along and you see another boat and the top of their Genoa is flopping around, send them over to me. They need this presentation, right? I mean, that's an now, what's the one thing that would change my mind about that? If you're overpowered, right? If you want to depower the top of your sail because you don't want a lot of power up there, it just creates more heel. So you might intentionally depower the top of the sail to make the boat a little bit more comfortable. So this twist in the sail is controlled by a number of factors, but anything that pulls down on the leech is going to cause the top of the sail to close. And so what do we have to do that? Main sheet, right? If I put the main sheet directly under the boom, most of the force is down, right? If I move the main sheet upwind, now I've got a little bit of lift. I allow that boom to lift. When the boom lifts, top of the sail opens up, right? So you hear, the hardcore racers, traveler up, traveler down. Traveler up means I'm trying to twist the sail off. Traveler down, I'm trying to power up that sail. I'm trying to close the top of the sail and create more power up on top. So you do that with the main sheet, or you can do it with Vang, right? Anything that puts downward pressure on the boom makes that happen. And we talked about this. On the Genoa, you've got the Genoa car, doing mostly the same thing. So as I push that car forward, I'm putting more down pressure on because I have more, the angle is down as opposed to when it's way back here. It's allowing, you've seen when you pull that car back, the clew rises, right? And if you look up on top, the top of that sail really twists off and depowers, right? So we talked about the main Genoa car. So again, the reason to twist or not to twist it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to power up the boat, you probably want to close the top of the sail. You want to make the top of the sail work for you. If you're being overpowered, it's a good idea to let that thing roll off, take some of the power off the sail. Shaping the sail, the draft of this. Let's talk about the mainsail, all right? So there's two things we look at. One is how much draft there is in the sail, how full it is. And the second thing is where that draft is located, where that maximum is located. And I control that with halyard tension. This may not be intuitive to you. How many people know that? Just curious. Yeah, so I'm starting to get into the point where I'm actually giving you something you didn't know. So why would I want to push that draft forward? You remember the shape of the sail I talked about? What makes that sail more efficient? by make it look more like a wing, right? So the more tension I put on that thing, the farther the belly gets forward and the more it looks like that oblong shape, right? So if I'm trying to get the boat up on a reach and get as high into the wind as I want, as I can, I'm going to put a lot of halyard tension on that, to the point of putting vertical wrinkles in the main, right? And you'll see there's a difference.
Can you accomplish the same thing with a Cunningham?
Yeah, everybody know what a Cunningham is? Okay, yes?
Yeah.
There's not a place to be. If you don't know, we should cover it. Cunningham is a way you can tension the sail by going up or you can go lying down. Either one would do it. Yeah. So yeah, we talk about shaping the sail, moving the draft forward, adding halyard tension. By the way, there's one other way to flatten the sail. How many of you have a backstay adjuster on your boat? Okay. So when you put backstay pressure on, two things happen. One is you tension the head sail, and my guess is most of you think of it, that's what you do with that, because it does, but that also helps you get upwind because you get a better shape to the Genoa. The other thing that happens though is this, and you can see at some point the head stay is as far as it's going to go back, and after that you're pulling down on the mast, and you've heard of pre-bend. Some boats are set up with an intentional bend in the mast, because when you put pressure on this thing, it can bow this way or bow that way. So they intentionally put a pre-bend on it so that when you put pressure on, that bend increases. What does that do to the shape of the sail? It flattens it. Is that good or bad for performance?
Depends.
Bad, right? We just said we want that shape. So you do that when you're trying to depower the sail, you put that pressure on, right? Everybody with me? So we have a lot of conditions up here where, I always say if you don't like the weather up here, wait 20 minutes, it's going to change. So you're out there sailing and you're just barely trying to make the boat going 6 or 7 knots, and all of a sudden it builds to 45, right? So you want a flat sail. You don't want power. You want to take the shape, that wing shape, you don't want it to look like a wing. And so you do all you can. You roll off the top, you put some tension on the backstay to try and flatten the inside of that sail and make the sail a little less powerful. How many people knew that? I'm just curious to how much you. Okay, good. Yeah. And here's one that's this is probably the last part of it I'm going to talk about before we get into some other things. But this is a pet peeve of mine. I had a friend who was a Commodore in a yacht club up in Ventura, in California, and he was the Commodore. And I saw him. I was talking to him, and he was bragging about carrying full sail on a Catalina 36 and 45 knots. And I said, I don't think you understand. That's not good for the boat, and it certainly isn't making the boat fast. And this comes down to boat balance, right? Because what he had was a boat that was completely out of control. Right? So when I say boat balance, the person who designed your boat, the designer, designed it so that when you have normal wind speeds on a reach, that boat is designed to go more or less straight. The two sails, which are kind of basically able to turn the sail, if they're equally powerful, the boat wants to go straight. If one is more powerful than the other, it wants to turn. How many of you have long keel boats? The long keel is great, but it ain't going to stop the boat from going upwind. Right? It may slow it down, but it's going to go upwind. This idea that it tracks it for a while and then it can't overcome the difference in the power between the two sails. So this comes down to, if the boat is balanced, then you have no reason to put rudder in, right? If the boat is unbalanced, right? Let's say here in this case, you have a main that's too powerful. Let's say you reefed a jib on this, so you've got more power in the main, and it wants to go upwind. That's called weather helm. I think you all know that. The designer designed it with a little bit of weather helm. Why?
Safety.
What does the boat do if it has weather helm? goes up into the wind and stalls. What does it do if it has lee helm? It goes downwind and jives. So that is a safety issue. So a normal boat, well designed, is going to be slow to go upwind, but it will go upwind on a reach, right? And that's a good thing. Now you go and you do all this reefing and everything, and you've completely changed the balance of the boat. So a couple of things happen. One is you might have lee helm, you might have weather helm, but more importantly, notice where the rudder is. In order to make the boat go straight, you need to put the rudder in. What does that do to the boat going through the water? That's a slow boat. So the designer went through all this effort to design this nice, slick surface, and you put the rudder in, right? And so the first thing I would tell you, you always want the rudder to be in the middle of the boat unless there's some unusual circumstance. The boat's fast, you have the full rudder to correct for anything. You round up because you're like this, and then another puff comes and you run out of rudder. And it just goes up into the wind. I've seen spreaders go in the water. It's dangerous, right? I'm sure some of you might have experienced this. But it's all about boat balance. So, bottom line here. Let me see, I'll just go through this. I'm getting ahead of my own presentation. This is the opposite. This is lee helm, right? And now you you got a rudder in. If you have to put the rudder in, you're out of balance. If you have to put the rudder in to make the boat go in a straight line, you're out of balance and the boat is slow. I mean, just a little bit of rudder in dramatically changes the drag on the boat. So we'll talk about, I mentioned some of this. Modern boats are designed with a small amount of this, by the way, this does apply to almost all kinds of rigs, but it mostly applies to sloop rigs. We have the two sails and you can play this game with them. And a couple of things I'll mention. One of the reasons that weather helm is in is because nobody likes a totally neutral helm. You can't feel it. So that's another reason to build in a little weather helm, because you get a little bit of resistance and it's a better feel to the rudder. If you have a really high-powered racing person, they can't stand a neutral helm. It just drives them nuts. They need to feel a little pressure to know where the rudder is. Reefing. So you got too much power, right? This happens, and you reef. So what did you do to the balance of the boat? Most people don't even think about that. And by the way, that's when it's most important, because you're reefing because there's a lot of wind. That's when this is most important, because it's when it's most dangerous to be out of trim, out of balance. Just a couple of notes. Most of you, how many of you have masthead rigs and Genoa-driven boats? 140, 150, yeah. How many of you have modern boats? More balanced sail plan, maybe 110. Anybody have a Hunter? Yeah, Hunter's got a fractional rig, heavily fractional rig, tiny little head sail, big old main, right? If you have an older boat, you got a Catalina 36 from the 1980s. It's got like a 155 on there, right? So any part of the sail that goes past the mast contributes to weather helm. It's on that side, right? It's on the aft side of the boat. So the first thing you do on a big Genoa boat is reef the jenny. Then once you get to the mast, then start reefing the main. That'll more likely keep the boat in balance. Yeah, as we said, changes the shape. Most of you have probably, based on what I saw hand raises before, you probably have full bat mains, right? How many of you have roller throwing main? Anybody? No? Okay, yeah. By the way, there's a lot of, in this industry, in this sport, there's an awful lot of rumor. There's a lot of opinions. I've heard people talk about boats that they've never been on, and certainly never been on in difficult conditions, but they have an opinion. I never buy one of those things. So, just be aware. I don't really know of any bad boats, but every boat is somebody's idea of a compromise, because you can't make it do everything. So a boat that's going to go in light air is going to be light, flat bottom, big sail plan. That's not a boat I want to cross an ocean in, and I have to put my teeth back in by the time I get to where I'm going. Right? You get beat to death. So when you're looking for a boat, when you're picking a boat, it's important to understand where you're going to go with it, what you're going to do with it, because that has a lot to do with which part of that compromise you want to work on. All right? So the modern boats are quite a bit easier to sail. In this kind of conditions in here, roller furling, I've heard a lot of bad things about roller furling. When they first introduced it, it was bad. It would jam all the time. The things they put up there that they called sails look more like rags with no shape at all, no power. The newer ones, they now have vertical battens, because what you're trying to do is hold out, everyone knows what a roach is, with a little extension on the leech. You can do that with half vertical batten. So you can get a decent shape size sail with a reasonable amount of shape in a roller furling boat. And it's actually very convenient. For those of us, I'm 79, I don't like going up on the deck and pulling. I've never seen a sail drop into the bag ever in my life. You always have to get up there and do something, right? And that's not a pleasant thing to do. So, one of the things you might consider is as we age, we look for easier ways to stay on the water because it's harder to do some of the things we didn't mind before. So but don't be afraid of roller furling. If you ever get to a place where you're going to change boats, if you want to talk to whoever's showing you the boat to make sure you know what you're getting. The older ones, they started putting them on mains about 2000, and about maybe 2010, they started using these half battens, which means they roll up nicely and they still have a reasonable shape. I would never tell you that a full batten main wasn't a little bit better. If you're racing, sure. If you're cruising, that's a pretty big compromise for the convenience of rolling the thing up. Also, we talked about balance. When you have reef points, there's only 2 reef points. You have a very small selection of what you can do with the sail. When you have a roller furling main, you can have it any size you want by the inch. So you can literally more easily balance the boat with a roller furling sail. The best, of course, is a boom furler, which doesn't have the compromises, but they're pretty expensive. I don't know of any manufacturer right now that puts them on stock. They usually have to have them custom made.
Although in mast roller furling, I've seen them out there generally in charter boats where they manage to jam them.
Oh yeah, so if you ever get on a boat, I spent a year in a service position in Marina del Rey for Beneteau, Catalina, and Hunter, and I fixed a lot of them. Only one did I have to cut out of the mast, and I did have to cut it out. But it's very simple. Most people don't realize is when the sail rolls up, the leech rises. So you want the boom to be loose. You've got to let the sail do what it wants to do. It wants to lift the boom, and if you hold it down, it's like holding one side of a window shade and try and roll it up. It's going to jam up in there, right? So loose main sheet, you want that boom to be able to move side to side at least 2 feet either way. Vang off. I have been on boats where the vang control is wrapped up and moldy. They don't know what it does, but it's on, right? And so, I keep jamming my sail. Yeah, because the boom's down like this and the sail's not going to roll, right? So if you ever get on it, first of all, don't be afraid of it. If you ever change boats, it's a nice convenience. And by the way, you get I think most places you get a rating bump if you have one, right? So it gets equalized out. But they're fairly good, and around here where we keep having to change sail plans, change sail arrangement, it's pretty nice to be able to do it from the cockpit and easily. The modern boats that have roller furling don't have the foot is not in a slot, it's a loose-footed sail, just grabbed at the clew. And those tend to hold their shape. Remember, the other thing is I reef that, the shape stays the same. When I reef this way, I really force the shape to be more not what I really want. So there's some advantages to it. Okay, so that's mainly the presentation. I was going to cover 2 things because we talk about sails. There's more than just the 2. By the way, how many of you have a cutter or a ketch?
Cutter.
What boat?
Lava 30.
Oh, nice boat. Yeah, double ender. Yeah.
Great to back up.
What's that?
Great to back up.
Yeah. So Most of the modern boats now are, quite, I sell them, so I have to be careful. I'm not that fond of them. There tend to be, if you look at the boats from Beneteau and Jeanneau, they've now got two little rudders. They've got a very flat bottom, got a big sail plan, big wide boats, you carry the beam all the way aft. They almost look like a diamond, like a triangle. Personally, I don't think they look good, but they are quick as hell in light air. You'd expect, flat bottom. The two rudders, by the way, are designed to be not like this, but like this. So when you heel the boat, this one's straight up and down. Because it's straight up and down, it's efficient, and it can be small. So the rudders on a Beneteau 38 are about that long, right? Now, that's all fine when I'm doing 5-6 knots. Now you come into the harbor and you're doing 2 knots, and you've got these tiny little rudders. Not a good operator. I had the first one that came off the ship down in Marina del Rey. I'm a sailing instructor. I almost hit the dock bringing it in. It did not turn. You have to come in hot and put the hammer down to get it stopped. So I still like the boats in the 90s because I think they're kind of middle of the ground. They're reasonably good performing boats. They're well built. They're not radical in any way. I don't mean to bash the modern boats. It's just not my idea of the right compromise. For some people, they're the right way to go. If you're a racer, you might want to take that compromise. Okay, I was going to add in 2 things. I think do everyone here know what a polar diagram is? Some not. Okay, a polar diagram is the designer's theoretical description of how the boat will perform at different wind angles and different speeds. And you can see that on one thing, the angle that the sail is at, or that the boat is running at, right? And then you see each of those lines you see represents a different speed. And so you see the red line on the outside, that says if I'm running at 145 degrees and I'm running in 40 knots, I'm going to be doing almost 14 knots. Follow? That's how you read that. If you've had a boat that's been designed since, well, probably many boats have this. Some are easy to get to the polars. If you're racing, that's your target. That's as good as a boat can do, at least theoretically. So it'd be interesting to know, how your boat is supposed to perform, to see if you're close to that. You see, so first 40 is a Beneteau club racer. It's designed to do PHRF rate. It's not a typical Beneteau, it's a little faster. So that's why you see those speeds. A Pogo is a rocket ship. You can see what that thing does, and it's a small boat. And the last one I have here, how many of you have asymmetrical spinnakers? Oh, okay. How many of you have symmetrical spinnakers? You're a brave man.
Old school.
Yeah. If I had a hat, I'd take it off to you. That's a lot of work. So the world of asymmetrical spinnakers is, most boats, when the wind goes behind the beam, they get slow, right? So the whole idea of spinnakers trying to power up the boat when you have the wind behind you or somewhere behind you. In the beginning, they used symmetrical spinnakers, more or less square sails that you pulled around in front of the boat. Complicated riggings. You got 4 guys and after guys and all kinds of stuff and lines to pull on. You need a crew up on the foredeck that really knows what they're doing or is willing to go swimming. Either one works, and so it's a difficult thing. In a symmetrical spinnaker, you can sit right up in front of the boat and you can sail straight downwind, slowly, but you sail straight downwind, no compromises. There are a bunch of sails that have been designed, asymmetricals have been around for a while, but asymmetrical is a sail that allows you to sail deeper than the Genoa, but not as deep as a symmetrical spinnaker. This is called this is a description of a couple of sails. The A stands for asymmetrical. So when you go to a sail maker, sails are usually made for a particular set of wind angles and a certain wind speed. Right? So most asymmetrical spinnakers you have for cruising are designed for maybe 15 knots apparent. By the way, apparent, right? So if you start reaching with that sail, the power goes up, right? The apparent wind goes up. So most asymmetricals are set up to do maybe most of them you can do 90 apparent, so you can do a beam reach with them. You go any higher than that, they're going to stall, and you may be back to 130, maybe a little more, depending on what determines that is how they're cut, how deeply they're cut. What determines the wind speed is how much material they're made of. So there's some of these, you see these are the wind angles. So an A5 is designed for over 21 knots at angles you can see from just barely 90 down to 135. And A2 is designed to go really deep. See where that is? It's way back down here. You can almost go straight downwind. So just as an example, when you go and say, hey, I want a spinnaker, it isn't a thing. It's many things. And you have to decide what you want to do when you ask someone to make you a sale for it. I'm pretty sure that, how many of you race with an asymmetrical? Only you want two brave people. Okay. Yeah, it requires some crew because someone needs to get up on the foredeck and put them up when you're going downwind and take them off when you're going upwind. So there is one last thing I'll mention. There is a sail that's been used quite a bit now that is more oriented towards the cruising sailor. It's called a Code Zero. Anybody heard of that? Yeah. So Code Zero goes on a roller on the front of the boat, all the way in front of everything. It stays up there, and you deploy it just like a Genoa. You might call it a reacher, but it's much bigger than that. So it's somewhere between your Genoa and the asymmetrical. It can sail higher than the asymmetrical, maybe 60, depending on how they cut it, but not as deep as you would expect. You can only get so much out of any one sail. So when you're racing, if you're racing in a place where you know where the wind's going to be, you can get a sail that hits it right on the nose. Around here, lots of luck, right? So I only mention these because it's part of this is those sails are trimmed basically the same. The Code Zero is pretty much trimmed like a Genoa, but the asymmetrical is a little different animal, and you don't put up an asymmetrical and put it on it and lock it into the winch. If you do, you're going to looking for a problem. It needs someone actively working on it. Yes.
Do you need a pole for Code Zero?
No, you don't. And by the way, you can take an asymmetrical is tacked to the bow, and it looks like a Genoa, right? Just a lot bigger, and it's loose. It's not tacked to the headstay, right? It's just a loose sail. You can put that tack on a pole, pull it around in front of the boat, and make it into a symmetrical type spinnaker, but it's missing it's missing a piece, right? But if you're racing, this is an interesting thing. You can get that boat to go downwind now. It has to be managed nicely because basically that foot is kind of floating around. It's no longer tacked. You pushed it around in front of the boat. You're able to drive the boat deeper, but someone needs to be managing that. So now you're working, the tack line is now going back to a winch, and you're using that tack line to shape the sail and pull it around and things like that. But it's something interesting for you. That's kind of another angle on trying to make the boat go faster. All right. Okay, that's what I've got. Any questions that I can answer for you? Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. Yeah.
A little more detail, please. You asked me a little on the vertical battens, the half batten versus full batten.
Yeah, so the progression was, so the first thing that happened in you have a roller furling headsail, right? Yeah, your Bob? Yeah. So we've had roller furling on the headsail for a long time. But it wasn't until about 2000 that normal cruising boats that were producing went to boats that had furlers. And they did it by having no battens in them at all. And they were miserable looking things. And there was no roach at all. So no power, no shape, and that's why they got a bad reputation. So what they did, we're trying to hold out the leech. So rather than do this, they did this. I'm sorry, instead of doing battens this way, they did little half battens just to hold the leech out up the top of the sail. And those roll nicely into, that's the other reason they jammed, because they started with long battens, and at the bottom they jammed because there's too much sail down there. So then they kept shortening them up, keeping the roach there, and then now you got the benefit of an easy to deploy sail and a reasonable amount of power and shape. Answer your question? Yeah? Okay. Anything else I can answer? Yeah.
Question. So if you're close hauled,
say 40 to 45 degrees off the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And a common mistake I see is as people fall off the wind, they loosen their genoa to get the telltales,
Mm-hmm.
trimmed.
Mm-hmm.
They say you go to 60 or 90 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could speak to how do you trim the mainsail at that point? Because one of the things a mistake people make is the mainsail stays too tight and the genoa's trimmed.
Yeah, so
I see a lot of people sailing with their main too tight and the genoa.
Yeah, so the simple answer is you look at every sail individually, how it is reacting to the wind,
Yeah.
from top to bottom, right? So there's a number of everybody who's, this is particular of people who are hardcore racers. The one design people are nuts. I mean, they're crazy. By the way, that's really about going back to the bar and accusing everybody of fouling you. That's what they do. Right? So, you trim each of the sails individually. There are different. Some people think trim the headsail first and the main, but in general, if you're trying to get power, you want both of them to be aligned properly. Now, if you have a big overlapping genoa, there's a backdraft that comes off that genoa that hits the main and changes its shape and creates a lot of drafts. So I have to tell you that although I love boats like the Baba, the modern boats with smaller head sails, the reason they were using the big head sails is because they could reef them. It makes it easy. Put all the power up where you can control it. But it's not a smart thing to do.
Well, I've raced my son, who's a great racer, and furled my sail halfway to make it look like an old high cut.
Yeah.
And beat him.
Yes.
And I said, now what do we think? Now that what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's why
Yeah.
I went faster.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about trying to get the most from the sails. And again, I can't stress, if you leave here with nothing else, from now on, when you're out there and you're on a reach, this really is only when you're going upwind is what I'm talking about here. Let go of the wheel and see what the boat does. If it just slowly, gradually, you're nice. If you go wham up into the wind, no. Oh, no, right? Because it says what's happening to the rudder. The biggest impact on sailors like us that are racing is they don't know where the wheel is. And that's a massive drag on the boat. I mean, the guy puts all this trouble and you just put a big board in the water and drag it through the water. So that's the thing that would have the most impact. An example, I was taking a boat with some people, a person who just bought a Tartan 40, beautiful boat, by the way. And we were taking it out and he got it all trimmed up and we're going. We're not going very fast. We're doing boat, it's a 40-foot boat. It should easily do 8 knots. And we're doing like 4 or 5 knots and the wind's blowing nicely, right? And I go up and I basically reduce the sail, but balance the boat. And we did 9 knots.